The morning air inside the terminal was heavy with the restless hum of travelers moving from line to line, the sound of rolling suitcases and distant announcements blending into an endless backdrop. But none of it reached her ears as she stepped forward toward the security checkpoint. Her boots striking the tile floor with steady purpose, her gaze locked straight ahead on the table where bags were searched and questions were asked. She carried only one bag, a battered old leather satchel, its edges worn down to pale threads and its straps darkened from years of travel. It looked like it had seen deserts, jungles, and streets lined with shadows. It looked like it had stories sewn into its seams, stories no one else could tell her fingers, curled tightly around the handle, as if she knew the moment she let go, something would change forever. The guards were already watching her, two of them standing close to the table, their eyes tracking every step she took. They were not looking at her like she was just another traveler. They were looking at her like a name from a file they had been told to memorize, like a face that had once been whispered about in a dimly lit office. Far from here, the younger guard shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his hand resting just a little too close to the grip of his sidearm, while the older one kept his arms folded, but his jaw tight, like he was counting seconds in his head. The line behind her shifted impatiently, but she did not. "Hurry!" She did not slow. She moved at the exact pace she wanted, and when she reached the table, she placed the bag down without a sound, her eyes never leaving the older guard who still had not moved. The younger one stepped forward. First, his voice, quiet but sharp, asking her to open the bag. She shook her head just once, and that was enough to make his brows tighten. The older guard stepped in now, his voice lower, steadier. He told her they could do this the easy way or the hard way, and still, her eyes never wavered. She simply pushed the bag forward across the table, as if offering it to an enemy in battle, daring them to take what was hers. The older guard glanced to his partner, then nodded, and the younger one reached down with both hands, gripping the bag by its straps, but when he tried to lift it, he felt the weight shift strangely, like the contents were not loose but locked into place, like they were part of something solid, something intentional. He set it back down and began unfastening, the buckles his movements slow at first, then quicker, as if urgency had taken hold. She stood perfectly still, watching every motion, her breathing steady, her hands at her sides. Her stance unyielding. The crowd around the checkpoint began to notice. The stillness between them, a strange quiet, settling over the noise of the terminal, as if the air itself was waiting for what would come next. The younger guard pulled the straps wide, his fingers digging into the weathered leather as if the bag had personally defied him for years, the seams groaning under the sudden force, the sound sharp against the dull hum of the terminal. A few travelers turned their heads, sensing that something different was happening here, something that did not belong in the rhythm of a normal morning. With a rough motion, he flipped the satchel onto its side and dragged it toward him, the contents shifting inside. With a weight that felt unnatural, he ripped open the first pocket and tossed its contents onto the metal table without care. A tattered scarf, a small notebook with pages folded over, and what looked like a handful of foreign coins that rolled toward the edge before stopping against the guardrails of the inspection station. Still unsatisfied, he went for the main compartment, the one that seemed heavier than it should be. His partner stepped closer now, his eyes narrowing as he watched the younger guard work. The older one said nothing, only standing just enough to block the woman's path should she attempt to move. Though she had not moved an inch, her posture was still straight, her gaze fixed on the scene in front of her as if this was something she had seen before many times. The leather resisted at first, the zipper catching, as though it too did not wish to reveal what was inside. The guard tugged harder, the teeth of the zipper snapping open with a sound like a blade being drawn. From its sheath, he plunged his hands inside and pulled free what he could reach. Clothes rolled tight into bundles, a few bound with strips of cloth and knotted at the ends. He tossed them aside without looking, letting them fall across the table. In a messy pile. He kept digging deeper, his movements turning rougher with each second, as if he believed that the real heart of this bag lay somewhere beneath the layers, something hidden from the world for a reason. His fingers scraped against something, solid, and his brows pulled together in suspicion. The object did not shift freely like clothing or books. It felt anchored as though meant to stay in place. The older guard leaned forward, now speaking low, asking what was in there. The younger one ignored the question, reaching further in both hands, now trying to pull whatever it was into view. The bag strained its seams, creaking under the force. The crowd had grown larger behind the ropes, whispers rising like the first gusts before a storm. Woman did not speak. Her breathing calm, her eyes unwavering, but there was something in the set of her jaw, something that told of battles fought before, ones that left scars unseen. The younger guard finally braced one knee against the table and, with a sharp pull, yanked the object loose, but he only managed to reveal the faint outline of its corner before freezing mid-motion, as if a sudden chill had swept through him. The younger guard stared at the object, barely visible within the torn mouth of the bag, his hand still gripping it but no longer pulling. The older guard noticed the hesitation and stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in to get a better look. The terminal noise faded further away, as if every sound was being swallowed by the tension around that table. The passengers waiting in line shifted uncomfortably, some craning their necks to see others whispering as if afraid to speak too loud. The guard forced himself to move again, tugging the object free, but the resistance was unnatural, as though something inside the bag clung to it, refusing to let go when it finally slid out into the open. It was wrapped in layers of faded cloth, bound tightly with fraying twine. The material looked old, far older than the bag itself, and it carried the kind of wear that comes from years of travel through places most people would never dare to walk. The older guard reached out, but stopped, his hand hovering inches above the bundle as though an unseen weight held it in place. The younger one glanced at him, waiting for a signal, but none came. The woman stood silent, her face unreadable, though her eyes carried the quiet fire of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen next. The older guard finally gave a short nod, and the younger one began untying the twine, his fingers fumbling slightly, as though the air around him had turned colder. Each knot came loose slower than the last, the crowd behind the ropes no longer whispering. Now they stood in complete stillness, watching the unwrapping, as though they too understood that something significant was being revealed. When the final layer of cloth fell away, it exposed a small metal case, its surface scratched and scarred, but strangely polished at the corners from years of being held and carried. The metal caught the overhead light in a way that seemed deliberate, casting a glint that drew every eye toward it. Younger guard reached to open it, but the woman finally moved, her voice calm but carrying a weight that cut through the air. She told him to think carefully before lifting that lid. Her words not a threat, but a warning one that came from a place beyond fear. The younger guard froze, his fingertips resting on the latch. The older guard met the woman's gaze, and for a long moment neither of them moved. It was as though an unspoken conversation passed between them. Then, without looking away from her, the older guard placed a hand over the younger guard, stopping him from opening the case. The decision seemed to surprise everyone, including the passengers, some of whom leaned forward in disbelief. The woman's eyes softened only slightly, and she took a single step closer, her presence filling the space between them, the metal case still resting on the table untouched, yet holding the attention of every soul in the terminal. The air around the table felt heavier now, as if invisible walls had closed in, trapping everyone within a small circle of silence. The older guard kept his hand pressed against the younger guard's wrist, his eyes never leaving the woman's face. She stood calm but unyielding, her boots planted firmly on the tile, her shoulders squared like a soldier waiting for an opponent to make the first move. The younger guard finally stepped back, letting his hands fall to his sides, though his eyes remained locked on the metal case. It sat there, dull yet somehow radiant under the harsh fluorescent light, its presence pulling every thought in the room toward it, as if it carried gravity of its own. The older guard moved slightly forward, his fingers brushing the cool surface, and he seemed to flinch at the touch, though he did not pull away. A soft murmur rippled through the line of passengers, one man raising his phone halfway, before lowering it again as if instinct told him that filming this moment might not be wise. The woman's gaze drifted briefly toward the movement, but she said nothing. Instead, her eyes returned to the older guard, watching him with a patience that was almost unnatural. The older guard asked her what was inside his voice, low and steady, yet carrying a hint of something that was not quite fear but close to it. She answered without hesitation, saying that what lay within was not meant for eyes that could not bear its truth. Her tone was not dramatic, yet it struck like a blade wrapped in silk cutting through the stale air of the checkpoint. The younger guard shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them, his training urging him to act, while something deeper urged him to stay still. The older guard straightened his posture, his fingers leaving the case, but not without a final trace lingering against the cold metal. He looked at her as though trying to read the years she had lived, the places she had been, the battles she had fought, and somehow lost or won in. Silence. The woman stepped forward, closing the small distance between herself and the table. The crowd leaned in ever so slightly, though none dared to speak. Her hand reached out but stopped just short of the case, as if seeking permission from something unseen. The older guard gave the faintest nod, his jaw set, yet his eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. She then placed her palm upon the case, her touch light yet deliberate. A strange quiet seemed to settle deeper than before, a stillness that carried weight like the moments before a storm. Her fingers traced the edges slowly, and for an instant the room felt colder. The lights above flickered, not enough to draw attention from those further away, but enough for those closest to notice. The younger guard swallowed hard, sensing that whatever came next could not be undone, and that every person in that space was now part of it, whether they wished to be or not. The woman kept her hand on the case for several breaths, her eyes never leaving the older guard's face. Then, without another word, she began to work the latch, her fingers moving slowly as if each motion had been rehearsed for years. The sound of the metal shifting was soft, yet it seemed to echo far beyond the checkpoint. The younger guard leaned in instinctively, his hand hovering over his holster, though something in his expression showed that he was not sure whether he wanted to stop her or see what was inside. The latch clicked open with a sound sharp enough to cut through the silence. The woman did not immediately lift the lid. Instead, she let the pause stretch until even the hum of the fluorescent light seemed to fade. The crowd behind the ropes was no longer simply curious. They were transfixed, rooted to the spot by a moment that felt far older than the room they stood in. When the lid finally began to rise, a faint glow spilled out from the narrow opening. Not bright, enough to blind, yet unnatural in its color. It was not the sterile white of the airport lights, nor the warm yellow of the sun. It was something in between, something that seemed alive. The younger guard blinked and took half a step back. The older guard stayed still, though his hand closed into a fist at his side. Inside the case lay an object wrapped in thin strands of dark metal coiled in patterns, too precise to be accidental. The metal shimmered as though it shifted colors when looked at. From different angles within the coils rested a stone no larger than a clenched fist, yet it pulsed faintly as though it had a heartbeat of its own. The glow came from deep within the stone, as if it held a piece of light that had been trapped there for centuries. The woman did not speak. She only looked down at it. Her face a mask of calm, but her eyes telling of 1,000 roads walked to keep this single thing from falling into the wrong hands. The older guard finally asked what it was, though. His voice was quieter now, almost a whisper. the kind one uses in a place of worship. The woman replied that it was something not meant to be found by those who saw only power in it, something that demanded more than they could give in return. The younger guard glanced at his partner, then back at the case. His training offered him no instruction for this situation. His instincts screamed to close it, yet his curiosity chained him to the spot. He noticed that the glow seemed stronger now, as if responding to the attention of those nearby, and for the first time, he wondered if the thing inside the case was aware of them watching. The air around the table seemed to tighten every breath from the crowd, sounding too loud. Every movement feeling too heavy. The woman's hand hovered just above the stone, but she did not touch it. Instead, she closed the lid slowly, with a precision that suggested the act itself was part of a ritual. The glow faded into nothing as the seal clicked shut, leaving the terminal once again in the harsh white light of the everyday world, though nothing about the room felt ordinary anymore. The click of the latch closing seemed to carry farther than it should, as if the sound had been etched into the minds of everyone who heard it. The woman slowly pulled the case back toward herself, her fingers curling around it with the care of someone holding more than just an object. She stood straight, her eyes sweeping over the faces in front of her. First the younger guard, then the older one, and finally the crowd. Beyond the ropes, her expression unchanging yet commanding in a way that required no raised voice, no threat. The older guard stepped aside just enough to let her pass, though his eyes followed her every movement, his mind turning over the weight of what he had just seen, and the truth he could not explain even to himself. The younger guard shifted, uncertain whether he should stop her or let her walk away. His training told him to act, but the memory of that glow rooted him in place. The crowd parted as she moved past them, some stepping back with wide eyes, others lowering, their heads as though unwilling to meet her gaze. The sound of her boots against the tile echoed like a drumbeat, steady and sure each step, taking her further from the checkpoint and deeper into the sea of travelers who unknowingly brushed shoulders. With the keeper of something beyond their comprehension, she did not look back. Not when the older guard called her name quietly. Not when the younger guard muttered something under his breath. Her pace never changed. Each movement deliberate, as if she carried not just the case but the responsibility of every mile it had traveled, and every secret it had kept. The air around her seemed lighter now, yet charged with the faint hum of something that refused to be silenced. The older guard remained, at the table, his hands resting on the metal surface. His reflection staring back at him from the polished edge. He felt the weight of a choice he had made without fully understanding it, and knew that he would remember her face for the rest of his life. The younger guard finally moved beside him, still watching the crowd where she had disappeared into the shifting tide of strangers. Neither spoke for a long moment, the hum of the terminal slowly returning as announcements crackled overhead, and the conveyor belts resumed their endless motion. Yet there was a shift, something subtle but certain, as if everyone who had been near that table understood on some instinctive level that they had witnessed something they could never fully explain. Far ahead, the woman blended into the crowd, her form swallowed by distance, but the case remained close to her side. Its weight pulling slightly at her arm, she moved with the silent determination of someone who had faced 100 checkpoints before, and would face 100 more, each one a battle in a war. Only she seemed to understand, and as the crowd closed behind her, she was gone, leaving only questions and the faint echo of boots on tile that seemed to linger long after she had vanished from sight.